Good morning. Letty Naboo from Stockton, Missouri. We're here today on Trials and Triumphs. Our guest today is the person associated with accident, and this is Jill Jacob Reynolds. Is that correct?
Jill Reynolds.
Jill Reynolds. Okay. Jill Reynolds has a Connections show on Thursdays around here, and
The Connection Gathering.
Connection Gathering. Okay. They kept giving me different names when I was asking about that, so you know. I only know the name of my show.
Hey, that's all you got to remember, one thing a day, how to get up.
Yeah, I remember the name of my show, and I remember the name of the one right before me. So, uh, I tend not to watch too awfully much television. I do go home and watch the shows off of here. The and Veterans Church and everything. So, anyway, you're based out of Branson, Missouri. Is that correct?
Yeah.
How you like Branson?
It's good. I've been there 4 years now from
Mhm.
Chicago.
Oh, well, I guess it's not as crowded as Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
but there's way too much traffic for me. I live in a little town with 1,800 people.
Traffic means nothing to me in Branson compared to 2 hours of bumper to bumper in Chicago. So
Yeah,
a little bit of traffic. You just got to know how to do all the back roads.
Yeah, well, like I say, I'm not real big on traffic. I do very well just to get down here each week. I'm not one for big cities anymore. I grew up in Kansas City area, from probably age 12 up, and I got used to that traffic, and I can drive it with my eyes closed. But anymore, I'm just a little bit tired of traffic. I don't even have stoplights in our town. There's not a single stoplight anywhere. So going anywhere with a stoplight disturbs me. So anyway, why don't you tell us, some of your growing up stories and so forth, because you actually went through a time of drug addiction and who knows what all at that point. So why don't you tell us a little bit of your story and your testimony and how you came to the Lord?
Yeah. So pretty much I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. I was the middle child, and my mother had quite a bit of trauma in her growing up days. She grew up in a family where, believe it or not, in the day in which is going all the way back to the 40s, where divorce was a prominent. Her mother and father divorced when she was young, and she was put in a boarding home. And she went to visit her own mother one day, and while visiting her mom, she was in an elevator and she was kicking the door of the elevator, excited to show her Halloween costume. And her toes got caught and cut off.
Oh, my.
And so she had to be put in a wheelchair. And while in the wheelchair, the man in the boarding home raped her at 7 years old. So her life began with lots of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And through that, I really do believe she had a borderline personality disorder that came into play. She left home to marry my dad just to get away from the insanity of her life. And she had my sister. And within a few months of my sister being born, my father's mother developed cancer.
Oh,
and so my dad was working two jobs and then helping out with the care of his mom till she passed. So my mom, I think, was really overwhelmed taking care of my sister, and 6 months later finding out she was pregnant with me.
Oh, my.
So
Yep.
my story began with not being wanted and wishing that I had not been born. And so that perpetuated throughout my entire childhood with my mother.
Mm-hmm.
And she took out all of her anxiety, depression on me. And so I was the nonverbal child. I had a brother 4 years later after me, 3.5 years after myself. But I was very nonverbal as a result of her anger and abuse.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't remember even talking hardly ever. I mean, I just like really being quiet and playing with my toys. My mom remarried when I was 7 to a man she barely knew, who turned out to be an alcoholic, bisexual, and bigamist, who was an abuser. And I witnessed him trying to kill my mom in the front yard when I was 7. And so he was taken away to jail and then moved away and never to be seen again. So he came in our life and came out. Now, when my mother and father got a divorce, my dad was the lifeline. He was the one who took us to Catholic Mass every Sunday, and he took us to sporting events and roller skating and movies. And so the only time I remember talking was when Sunday morning came, and
Uh-huh.
I would purge all my words in one day. it was like
Okay,
it was like a
this
bulimic.
is my one free day. I can say what I want.
Yeah, and he would listen
Uh-huh.
without yelling. So so that was kind of my recourse. Growing up, again, I was the scapegoat, the lost child, and my sister was the energizing, bubbly bunny who could get invited to anything, and she became the homecoming queen. And I didn't even get invited to prom, so that'll kind of give you an idea. So at around at 14, I went to a dance, a local dance, and I met a 17-year-old boy who invited me one day to his house. I was really excited, so I went there. And about 20 minutes into being there, he pushed me onto the couch and he raped me. And I remember walking home 5 miles, bleeding and crying. And I never told a soul when I got home because I thought my mom would say, "Oh, you're so stupid to go to a boy's house." And my dad would probably have gone there to kill him.
Yep.
So I kept that a secret for my entire life till I got into my late 40s. And, but as a result of that, I did not want to develop my body. So I started taking White Cross amphetamines. Back then, they called it speed,
Mhm.
and it would cause me not to have an appetite. And I took one and then two and then three. And so before you knew it, I was really more into an anorexic state.
Mhm.
And I remember going to school in flannel shirts, chick kicker work boots, and blue jeans, and just trying really hard to hide my body image. And after that rape, and so that continued. And then at 18 years old, about this time of my life, my mother met another man and remarried a third time. And this man was a passive aggressive alcoholic who adored me. And so every time he'd walk past me, he'd grab my butt or my boobs and tell me how beautiful I was. And my mother would rage at me and tell me how much she hated me because he loved me more than her. And so that set me up for more physical abuse from my mom. She had the emotional abuse.
Mhm.
And then when they would have fights, which would go till 2, 3, 4 in the morning, and she couldn't sleep, she would get out of bed and she always slept naked. And she'd walk into our bedroom, my sister and my bedroom. We shared a room and we had twin beds, and my bed was closest to the door. So she would roll into bed with me with no clothes on, and when I was a teenager. And it wasn't until years later that my professional therapist told me that that was sexual abuse because I never knew. I just knew I felt totally disgusted with her sleeping next to me with no
Mhm.
clothes when I was a teenager.
Yeah. That
So,
would disturb me horribly.
yeah, so we didn't have any boundaries in our house. There were zero boundaries. I mean, when my stepdad would go to the bathroom, he'd have the door open. When they would have sex, they'd have the door open. So there were no boundaries in the home at all. So everything was pretty crazy. I mean, I remember one time my brother in fifth grade, his school was maybe 3 blocks from home, and he came home at lunchtime and the whole entire house was destroyed. I mean, like everything was destroyed. TVs were, I mean, it was like everything. And he went back to school. He sat down, ate lunch, went back to school, and mentioned it to his teacher, who called my mom, who called the police to find out our house had been robbed of everything. And my brother just thought it was my stepdad's dad coming home, throwing the dishes or he'd throw
Yeah.
the refrigerator out. I mean, it was like, so we lived in so much craziness that you didn't know what normal looked like.
Mhm.
And so even for him, he just didn't know what normal was. So my sister, when on her 18th birthday, she left home. She had met a guy and moved in with him. And so everyone, as we aged out, we got away as soon as we could from the
Mhm.
insanity at the house. And so on my 18th birthday, which is February 12th, I had my suitcase packed. I had thankfully graduated high school a half a year early. Don't ask me how, because I flunked out freshman year. Because freshman year, we would go to one of the girls' houses almost every day, and we would smoke pot, or we would do speed, or we dropped acid. I mean, we did everything you can imagine in the 70s. Believe it or not, my high school, which I just find so interesting today, back in 1970s, our high school literally had a smoking sit-in the hallway to protest that we wanted to be able to smoke on campus as high school kids. And we won. And we won, which totally blows my mind away today to know that you have to be 18 to buy cigarettes, but we're 13, 14, 15, 16-year-olds, and we protested and we won. So there was a smoking section outside on the parking lot of the campus. So in between classes, everyone would go out there, or we'd go into the bathrooms and smoke cigarettes or joints and go to class. It was nuts of the 70s. And so I flunked out freshman year and still graduated a half a year early. Don't have any idea how I got through all of this. I just did. But I remember my senior year, I took a film study class, and we were supposed to make a short film with 3 or 4 of us on a team. And everybody was making films on motorcycles or drag racing or drugs. And I said, well, let's make our film on child abuse. I got the perfect story. And so we created this film, and I graduated in January of 1972. And then I went back in June to get my diploma. When I came back in June, my film study teacher said, I've been trying to find you. I entered your film in the Illinois Film Festival, and you came in first place for your child abuse.
Oh, wow.
I wish I still had that movie. I don't know what happened to it, but it was a short film. So I left home at 18 with $25 in my pocket, not to ever return. And so here I moved from the suburbs of Chicago, Des Plaines, which was a 98% Caucasian school. I don't remember one black being there and a few Hispanics. And I moved to the city and just met someone like that I met one time. And she said she knew of a house in Old Town Chicago where they had a spare bedroom, and that she was going to rent it but couldn't afford the rent by herself. Would I like to share the bedroom with her? And so I didn't have anywhere to go. Of course, I said yes. So my very first roommates out of high school was so funny. I lived with a male black probation officer, a Caucasian gay cab driver, and Kathy was a Playboy bunny. And
that's quite the group.
That was a group. So you can imagine the parties: blacks, gays, bunnies. That's a book in itself, right?
Yeah. You know, my late husband, he found a house to rent once, and so he needed some roommates and so forth, and he had 9 strippers for roommates.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's pretty safe, because he was probably the bodyguard.
Yeah, he was a bodyguard. He didn't have anything to do with any of them, other than, he kept the house going.
Right. Well, they probably had him as the bouncer when they needed to dance at bachelor parties. Good gig. You make good money as a bouncer.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah. I know those stories. So anyway, when I was living in this house, Kathy got me an interview at the Playboy Mansion. Playboy Club, and I put the uniform on, and you have to stroll across the room in front of the bunny mother, and she determines if you're quality material to be a bunny. And so I passed the test. I had that perfect figure, and I took the uniform home, and then realized I had to go back to work, and she wanted me to put on fake nails, eyelashes, makeup, and stiletto heels. Well, remember, I was a shit kicker, boots, and flannel shirt girl. I could put the uniform on, but when I figured out I had to put the fake nails and all that, my body image issues were like flooded, and I turned the uniform in and said, I can't do this. So I did never become the bunny. but we hung out at Hugh Hefner's
Mm-hmm.
mansion at a lot of parties. In fact, we partied with the Rolling Stones and Stevie Wonder at the mansion. So that began my getting away from home.
Mm-hmm.
And then one of my favorite bands of the 70s was Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Yep.
And they had a sold out concert at the Auditorium Theater. So Kathy and I, my roommate, we went down, and I now was working as a Holiday Inn central reservationist doing central reservations. And so Kathy and I went down to the Auditorium Theater. It was sold out. And by the alley, which is where the limos pulled in, there was a black bouncer there. And Kathy flashed her bunny pass and said, "Could you let us in?" He says, "Absolutely." So that's how I learned how to get backstage for the first time. So when I got backstage, I was really a smart young girl. I figured, okay, I'm backstage. I'm going to make sure I take advantage of this opportunity. So while backstage, I started chatting with Harry the doorman and the concert promoters
Mm-hmm.
and the record label people and the roadie from Emerson, Lake and Palmer. I didn't care about the band. So by the time the concert ended,
Mm-hmm.
we had carte blanche backstage access to any concert we wanted to attend
Wow.
for free. It was like, come anytime you want. And so Kenny, roadie from ELP, he also worked for James Gang in Black Oak, Arkansas. And when he wasn't touring, he would come and stay with me, and we started dating. And he wanted to marry me. And at that point, around 19, I said, you know what? I don't think this is for me. So I ended the relationship. And my girlfriend Denise was going to college in Arizona, Tempe. So I decided to do a ride share and go to Arizona. And I stayed there for about 7 months living with her and cocktail waitressing. And then I met a girl named Michelle, and she wanted to travel. So her and I hit the road, and we hitchhiked from Arizona through California, the Redwood Forest, to Portland. And we got to Portland. I met a guy and a group of people that kind of had a hippie commune. And so we moved into there,
Mm-hmm.
and I worked at the Paramount Northwest, again, going to concerts. And Michelle said, I really want to move back to San Diego where my mom is. So a couple months, 7 months into it, we ended up in San Diego. So San Diego was where all of my life did a big turnaround. So that was in So I got to San Diego. Within a few months, I met a guy named Michael, and he was a surfer and he was a cocaine dealer. And so
Hmm.
within a couple of months, I started to snort cocaine,
Mm-hmm.
and I liked it. I didn't like the drugs that made me tired. I didn't like Quaaludes or any of the downers or
Mm-hmm.
marijuana. I like stuff that let me talk, because remember, I was nonverbal all those years.
Yeah.
So it brought me out of my shell.
Mm-hmm.
And someone said, once you started talking, you never stopped. It was like
That's
20.
funny. My mother said that about me.
Did she? Yeah, it was like 15 years of no talking, and I made up for it.
Yep. I used to talk for my brother. I talked for everybody, whenever I decided to talk.
That's funny. That's funny. So I was in San Diego, and I was working at different places. I was a front desk associate, then I was a bartender and a cocktail waitress. And one day when I was food waitressing, three men came in, and I started talking to them. And one guy had asked me out, and Michael and I, even though we dated other people. It was kind of a very weird relationship. And so I went out with Paul one night and asked him where he worked. And he says, "Well, I own a bar in San Diego called the Body Shop." And I said, "Isn't that like one of those dancing places?" He goes, "Oh, yeah, but it's not what you think." He said, "Let me take you." And I was like, ah. And it's funny. There were two things back in those days. You got to have morals, right? And you
Mm-hmm.
got to remember, I was into all this partying. So my two morals were that I would never be a prostitute and I would never shoot heroin. Anything else went. Those were my morals. Let's get them straight.
Yep. Okay. Let's see. We're not going to do this.
Everything else was okay. So he takes me there, and I'm thinking, this is a bunch of prostitution. And so I get there, and I find out that Miss Nude World works there, and the dancers were college educated women. I mean, I'm talking about
Mhm.
therapists, doctors. I mean, I'm talking big degrees.
Right.
And I'm like, why are they dancing? I
There's
found
a lot of cash right there.
and I'm like, it was you could dance 3 nights and make enough money for the whole week to pay all your bills, so your career money would be whatever. So, I get there, and one of the girl and of course, you get there and everybody's snorting cocaine in the dressing room and doing shots of tequila. So,
Mhm.
I did that, and one of the girls says, "Come on up and try it with me," and I'm like, "Oh, man." So, I did. Well, we did one set of 3 songs together, and that was in 1974. In one set, in 3 songs, made $100.
Mhm.
And I'm like, $100 in 9 minutes? Dancing? So I was hooked. So
Yep.
I started dancing, and within a year's time, paid cash for a car. And the one thing that was so different about that place is the bouncers made sure no one in the place ever touched us. We cocktail waitressed and then we danced. We cocktail waitress and then we danced.
Mhm.
And they even made sure they would take turns following us home to make sure no patrons would follow us home.
Oh, well, you had really good bouncers there. I worked as in a club like that once, and no, if you wanted the bouncer to do anything, you had to pay him. If you wanted the bartenders or anything but to do anything, you had to pay them. It
Mm.
it was horrible.
No, these guys took really good care of us. Now we did pay them when it came to we hired them when we got hired to do bachelorette parties or
Mhm.
bachelor parties. They came with us to protect us, and
Right.
everything was fine. So this went on, and what I started to realize doing this for about 4 years is I started to realize that dancing affects you physically, emotionally, spiritually, and sexually. And so you go home and you're completely, totally drained.
Right.
And so I would work Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And of course, I'd get high during that whole time, but I could still function. I know
Mhm.
that sounds crazy. But on Saturday night, when I'd get off work at 2 in the morning, that's when things escalated for me. And so I'd go to Michael's house at 2 in the morning when I get off work, and a group of us would go there. And we literally would do a binge, get high from Saturday night all day Sunday, Sunday night all day Monday, all Monday. And then around Tuesday afternoon, around one ish, I would say, well, I'm going to go back home to my apartment and crash. So I'd go home on Tuesday and sleep all Tuesday afternoon and evening, and then wake up at around 1 or 2 in the afternoon on Wednesday to start my shift at 3 in the afternoon on Wednesday.
Mhm.
And so during that time, which lasted a couple of years, it escalated from doing a line of coke like this to lines of coke like this, and from one shot to doing a whole bottle of tequila or screwdrivers, and
Mhm.
from one pack of cigarettes to 4 or 5 packs a day,
Yeah.
and maybe 1 to 2 bowls of rice Chex cereal a day and no food. So needless to say, within 4 years, I got down to 97 pounds. My eyes were sunken in. And I remember driving on the expressway in San Diego, and I couldn't remember what exit to take.
Mhm.
Nothing looked familiar. I was starting to have the blackouts.
Yeah.
And that got scary to me.
Yeah. That would scare me to death.
Yeah, because I was driving, and luckily I never killed anyone, and I really didn't have any control anymore over my mind. It was gone. It was
Mhm.
gone. And I think not only was it the drugs, but I think more than the drugs, it was the anorexia, the starvation of no food,
Right.
because my brain wasn't being fed. And so during this now period of my life, and sadly to say, we had escalated our sexual activities to group sex. So it was very crazy. It was
Mhm.
very, very crazy. And in fact, I even got involved with a cult like group called Eureka, which was kind of like the Est movement, where they'd go into transcendental meditation and out of body levitation and past lives. It was crazy. So my spirit was owned at that moment by Satan. He
Yep.
he had control over my life.
Mhm.
And so this time I'm living with Michelle, And one day she said, "Hey, I heard about this church in San Diego called Calvary Chapel. And Mike McIntosh is a recovered heroin addict, and he's the pastor." She goes, "Let's go check it out." So we did what any normal person going to church on a Wednesday night would do. We did a couple of lines of cocaine and went to church.
Well, we all have something to do.
But you can't go to church straight when you're an addict. So we went to church, and there were about 60 people sitting in the back row.
Mhm.
And Mike, at the end of the sermon, did an altar call and said the Lord had laid it on his heart that someone in the back row was to come forward that night and give their life to the Lord. As he said it, my one knee twitched, and I just assumed it was the coke, and of course I pushed it down. A moment later, he said the same thing, and this time both knees jumped.
Mhm.
And I went, that's kind of weird that I'm still, I haven't done a line of coke in like an hour now. Like I'm still jumping. And a minute later, he did it again. And my legs were like a bunny rabbit. They wouldn't stop jumping. And so I just jumped out of my chair, ran down to the front, and they prayed over me, and I gave my life to the Lord.
Mhm.
Well, they gave me a Bible. And keep in mind, I was raised Catholic, but I had never read the Bible. And they gave me a Bible. And I went home that night. And every single night I kept getting high. And if 3, 4, 5 in the morning, when you got cocaine eyes like this and you can't sleep, I would call out and say, "God, if you really came into my heart, would you please help me?" So about 4 months later, Michelle and I had a really big fight because her coke dealer was coming over and I had friends over, and you don't have friends over when your coke dealer is dropping drugs off. So we had a big fight. I called in sick at work, found out I had a tubular infection, and if I didn't get off my feet, it could erupt. When I called in at work, now I was bartending, and they said, "Jill, you've been coming to work so high, you can't even function. We have to let you go." So, as they say in recovery, I hit bottom in one, two, three. I had a fight with my roommate, was sick, and lost my job.
Mhm.
Instead of being freaked out, I had the most unbelievable peace come over me. And I felt the Holy Spirit
Yep.
say, "Pack up whatever you have in your suitcase, get in your Toyota, and drive back to Chicago and get out of California." And I'm like, "Chicago, November in the winter, move back to Chicago. Okay, Lord, what are you going to do?" And I'm still using. And so I did. And I went back to Chicago. My mother had been in a major car accident and had settled and bought 2 condos. So she said I could pick the one that I wanted and not pay rent for 30 days. So I picked one. I found a job bartending, of course. While I bartended, this guy I met one time, I went out with him, got high, and never saw him again. And but while I was working at that bar, someone mentioned this new church that had just opened down the street called Willow Creek Community Church.
Mhm.
And I said, "That sounds kind of like the church where Mike McIntosh was. What time do they open?" And so I literally got off work at 2 in the morning, got home at 3, and service that day, next day on a Sunday, was at 10 a.m.
Mhm.
I set my alarm, drove to church, and that was in 1981, and started going every single week. Well, the desire to use drugs was lessening and lessening and lessening. And I got involved with the singles ministry and really was starting to thrive. What was really funny, ended up getting fired at that bar because someone said they saw me dealing coke, and I wasn't. And it was like the first time I really was innocent. And so I got a job selling radio advertising. So I got away from the bar scene.
Uh-huh.
I'm now going to church. I'm now involved with the singles ministry. I put an ad in the paper looking for, this is funny, Dina, I put an ad in the paper looking for a straight female roommate, not straight meaning not gay, but straight meaning no drugs. In the 70s, straight meant that you don't take drugs. Totally different wording. And so who does God bring me? But he brings me the head bookkeeper of Channel 38, the Christian TV network. So
Wow.
she moves in with me. And so we're living together. I'm going to church, blah, blah, blah. And so one night she decides to spend the night at her parents' home. And Satan had it all planned. So that night I get a phone call at 7 o'clock from that one guy that I had met at the bar that I'd gone out with one time and got high and never saw again.
Mhm.
And he said, "Hey, Jill, it's Joey. I'm down the street. I've got some good coke. Can I come over?" I said, "Well, Joey, I don't do coke anymore and I'm not sleeping around." He goes, "Well, why?" And I said, "Because I found God." He goes, "Well, could I come over so you can tell me about God?" And I was in baby Christian. So I said, "Okay." So he came over and he did what the typical addict does. As soon as he got to my house, he poured the vial of Coke on my coffee table and said, "It's there just in case you want it."
Mhm.
And so I realized that Satan had come over that night, not Joey. And so within 5 minutes, I fell, got high, and he had told me he had had a vasectomy. So I went ahead and slept with him, and 4 weeks later was pregnant. And that
Mm.
changed the trajectory of my entire life because pre Christianity, while dating Michael, I had 2 times needed to go off my birth control, and each time got pregnant, and both times thought that the only choice I had was abortion.
Mhm.
So 2 times before I had had abortions. The first time I was completely oblivious. The second time I was so in distress that I opened the car door at 60 miles an hour and almost jumped out to commit suicide because I was under so much distress. So now I am here again, pregnant, this time a Christian. And I tried to reason with God.
Yeah, that doesn't work usually.
No,
No, no,
no,
that never
no,
works. He
no. So I tried to reason with God and say, God, I've had 2 abortions in the past. Now I'm trying to follow you. And there's only one sin that I can't hide behind, and that's this pregnancy.
Mhm.
So is it okay if I just abort one more baby? I don't think he went for that.
No, probably not.
So instead, I took a hot bath, and while I was in the bathtub, I could visually see Jesus walking down the path on his way to be crucified, carrying the cross as people were spitting at him, mocking him, ridiculing him, and he was being beaten.
Mhm.
And as he fell to the ground bleeding, he looked up at me and said, "Why do you care what other people think of you when I went to the cross suffering more embarrassment, humiliation, and shame than anyone in the world? And I
Mhm.
did it all for you. So why do you care what your friends at church think about you?" So the
Mhm.
next day, I canceled my abortion, and my son is 40 years old today, and I have 3 beautiful grandkids. And as a result of that pregnancy, I really do believe that that was my benchmark to never return to drugs or alcohol again. And I was
Mhm.
totally delivered. The moment I made the decision to follow Christ instead of the world, he
Right.
took the desire. And you know, it was funny. Years later, when I was hearing stories on the TV about people becoming crack addicts,
Mhm.
I remember saying, "This is so funny." I was like, "Oh, gee, God, I'm so glad I got out of taking cocaine and didn't become a crack addict." And he looked at me and God looked at me and says, "What are you talking about? You were freebasing. That's crack cocaine." And back in the day, we called crack cocaine freebasing. We'd burn the
Uh-huh.
cocaine back and we'd smoke it in a pipe. So I'm like, wow, I was a crack addict and I got delivered. And that blew my mind away because you talk to so many crack addicts that it's hard to get over crack addiction. And yet the Lord just totally took that desire away from me. Now, it took me 2 more years before I hit a bottom, realizing that I was a dry drunk. And
Mhm.
then that's when I started going to AA and Narcotics Anonymous meeting and digging deep with Christian therapists of my onion to get
Mhm.
well. So
Yeah.
that's kind of been my journey of recovery.
Yeah. Well, we've all had those onion layers in our life. We've all done things before we came to the Lord that just. I look back now, going, "How'd you live through that?"
Hmm. Yeah.
And I talk with a lot of people. My stepson, he was a heroin addict forever. And, the Lord finally delivered him a few years back. And, I talk with a lot of people who've gone through that situation, drug addiction, alcoholism. Um, you know, I've talked with a lot of hookers. I, and there are so many people that seem to think that if you've done that once, you have now trapped yourself in that mindset forever,
Mhm.
and they're going to look down on you and they're going to talk bad about you and so forth. And it's hard for people to understand that the Lord has delivered you from that and you are not that person anymore. You don't
Mhm.
have to do that anymore. And if they say something bad about you, turn around and walk away. You
Mhm.
don't need that kind of negativity in your life,
Yeah.
you know?
And now I've come to believe, in closing, I've come now to believe that those out there who have been into prostitution or anything like that, dancing, that I really now realize that the people that I've met and talked to over the years have done that as a control mechanism from their own abuse. Like, remember, I was date raped. And
Hmm.
so when I danced, I had power over those men that couldn't
That
touch me.
that is right.
And as a prostitute, you feel like you have power over those men. And so it's a power thing to kind of feel in control from your abuse from your childhood.
Hmm.
And many people will sit there and judge someone that's been a dancer or prostitute instead of going to them in love and saying, "Can I hear your story of pain, of control and abuse?"
Yeah.
And what
Whenever I was dancing, I know that, there was a kindergarten teacher. She was probably the most sexual woman up there on stage you'd ever run into. There was nurses, there was
Mhm,
all college students and stuff,
mhm,
making the money to get what they wanted to do.
exactly.
And so whenever people look down on dancers, I have to um, go and kind of shake them a little bit and say, you don't even know who you're talking to. You don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
They've got more going for them, but my heart always broke for the young girls that decided to be a dancer, and they would get so addicted to the cocaine and things like
Mhm,
that in the dressing rooms and dance around that floor and think they're going to meet Mr. Right and he's going to take them out of there.
mhm.
And it's like, no, he comes in for his bachelor party. He treats you like you're, you
Crap.
crap. And, that's it. You're not going to meet Mr. Right here. He's not going to come and save you. This is not Pretty Woman.
Mhm. Yep, yep, yep. Well, I remember one nurse at the body shop, she ended up marrying a Vice Squad cop that year. But I know we have to break for Holy Hydrogen, so before we
Yeah.
run out, we'll give a word to the sponsor on your show.
Yeah, we're advertising for Holy Hydrogen now and ask that y'all check it out for your own health purposes. Hydrogen's really good for you. And then also, we are on a fundraising campaign now. We need to get some money to keep our programming going. And so we ask you to go to axmediagroup.com and click on the donate button whenever you have a moment and just help us keep the programming on the air and just we're trying to expand. Okay. We have more shows that we want to have on. Jill has a show. She's with Braveheart Ministries. Her show is on Thursdays.
Mhm.
And so I get to visit with her
Yeah, yeah. And I
tomorrow.
know, I know, our president said that we need a $20,000 fundraiser. So
Hmm.
even $5, $10 will help. So, and with Holy Hydrogen, if you buy from Holy Hydrogen, and you utilize the code AXE, you get $100 off, and then some of that money from the purchase goes to X Ministry. So you're helping the ministry as well.
Yep. Well, we
So
are the voice of the nonprofits, and we need everybody with us at this point in time, and then ask for your help.
thank you.
Hydrogen is used by health professionals as a powerful antioxidant and the number one tool to fight inflammation. Studies show therapeutic potential in cancer, diabetes, digestive, and heart issues, and essentially every organ and system in the body. This is not medical advice, because I'm not your doctor, but if you have any health concerns, I strongly recommend that you learn more about hydrogen. Get educated at holyhydrogen.com and order the best hydrogen generator known to man. Use code AXE for 100 off your order. Because hydrogen is the smallest molecule in existence, it can pass through the cell membrane and even the blood-brain barrier to clear out inflammation and free radical damage where other antioxidants just can't get to. Visit holyhydrogen.com to see the latest technology that elevates your immune system and fights inflammation. Search their research library to see if hydrogen has a track record for helping a health concern you're dealing with. Use code AXE for 100 off your order. Remember, holyhydrogen.com.
Yeah, I've been talking to people who've been getting this product, and
Mhm.
there's people that have had lupus
Mhm.
and rheumatoid arthritis and cancer, and it rejuvenates your cells
Mhm.
and brings you to optimal health. So it's a really cool product because not only do you put the water in that machine, and it produces hydrogen and you drink it, but it comes with a little headphone, and you put the little nostril thing on, like a breathing apparatus, and you can sit and watch TV, read a book, be on your computer, and breathe in hydrogen for 30 minutes a day, and it rejuvenates all your cells.
Oh, well, that's interesting because I know the
Sorry, it's time. We're out of time.
we're out of time. Thanks for coming. Yeah,
Are we
the
off the air?
No, we're still going.
Oh,
we're still going.
Yeah, you say goodbye.
Okay. Well, we thank you for joining us today. Please join us tomorrow for Jill's show at 11 o'clock tomorrow morning, and just have a wonderful week. Thank you.
thanks,